What do Vladimir Putin, a Romanian in love with Brazil, and the murder of a mafia boss have in common? Stay tuned and I'll tell you. Before we get into it, a little context, just so you understand the chaos we're about to get into. Ukraine was part of the USSR until everything exploded in 1992. Far from being a happy beginning, the divorce generated a strange system, which mixed the old vices of communism with the new ones of capitalism.
Esto se va a poner feo.
A mix that resulted in an almost feudal country, divided into regions governed by businessmen who consolidated themselves as a pseudo-nobility local mafia known as oligarchs. One of those regions is Donbass, a place that not only does not enjoy a very good image, but even seems to go against the rest of the country. Mining, gas, and an almost carnal relationship with its giant neighbor are the hallmarks of a stronghold dominated by the Donetsk clan, a group of businessmen who, thanks to their activities, some of them not very legal, let's say, established themselves as one of those local nobility mafias I told you about. In that particular corner of Ukraine, long before the appearance of the oligarchs, the Stajanovets emerged, named after Alexei Stajanov, a popular miner in the area. As it was the only club, it needed players, so it called them from two other teams around there. But as after World War II, only 3 survived, it had to start from scratch. New life, new name. The old Stajanovets was now Shakhtar or Shakhtar depending on whether a Russian or a Ukrainian said it.
¿En qué quedamos entonces?
Why such a name? The club, like almost everything around there, has a close connection with mining, in this case coal mining. To extract coal, vertical underground shafts called Schacht in German were used. The locals took that name and Russified it.
Y listo.
Totally unnecessary information, but it is useful to fill in the blanks. Consolidated as a typical mid-table team, Shakhtar lived out its Soviet existence with more sorrow than glory. And so, perhaps, it continued until its Western compatriots realized that communism and altogether was no longer such a good idea, and they set up shop. This was very good for them, since, in one fell swoop, they were able to shake off the old restrictions. They definitively adopted their Ukrainian name and became professional. And so they became, along with the once all-powerful Dynamo Kiev, the strongest team in the country's newly created league. And yet several of their stars, as happened in other parts of Eastern Europe, escaped like convicts to the Western leagues, seduced by the possibility of pocketing extra money. It is around this time that Alexander Akhat Bragin enters the story. In the days of the USSR, the man had accumulated a considerable fortune thanks to his business dealings in the world of gambling, in the currency market and, according to rumors, in organized crime.
Come on!
Yes, just as you hear it, the not-so-good Bragin was one of the heavyweights within the Donetsk clan, the businessman mafia of Donbass, which I just mentioned. Like every leader, he had a right-hand man, someone he trusted the most, a blonde boy called Rinat Ajmatov. Someone we will talk about in a bit, but who, at that time, was just a kid who solved his problems between gangs. It seems that, among other virtues, he had a talent for numbers, since, in the early 90s, he began to include him in his business dealings. In this way, the blonde boy amassed a little money that allowed him, always alongside his mentor, to venture into various investments.
Ay, qué bonito, de verdad.
But you know the saying, he who does bad ends badly. Well, it seems that Bragin was not so popular because, in October 1995, he was blown up with 11.5 kilos of explosives in his box, when he was going to watch his Shakhtar in a league match. To give you an idea, the poor guy was recognized only by the watch he was wearing.
Bueno, pero algo es algo, ¿verdad? Pues peor es nada.
And his faithful friend? He escaped by a miracle, conveniently stuck in a traffic jam. A fortuitous event that allowed him not to be with his mentor and presumed friend at the moment when he passed away, violently, to a better life. And while Bragin was being spoon-fed, Rinat inherited his entire empire. The question is, who blew up the old man? Supposedly, a rival gang helped by a police commander. Listen to this because it paints a picture of justice in the place. The policeman, who lived in Greece, was extradited 10 years after the bombing and sentenced to life imprisonment. The man appealed and declared himself innocent, arguing only that everything was false and that they wanted to incriminate him. Impressed by such firmness, the judge ruled,
Caso cerrado.
Having escaped the way he did, Ajmatov knew that the universe had given him a chance and that he now had a mission, a job to do. Did he get his life back on track? Did he found an NGO? Did he fight hunger and injustice? None of that nonsense, but he did everything possible to increase the inheritance left to him, unintentionally, by his friend and mentor, the less fortunate Brajin. A year after the boom, he was named president of Shakhtar, and in 2000 he created System Capital Management, a company with which he acquired mining companies in Donetsk. He invested the profits everywhere and thus, the supposedly good Rinot became the richest man in Ukraine and, according to gossip, the new leader of the Donetsk clan. So to clean up his image, he appealed to the bread and circuses thing and poured a ton of money into Shakhtar, football academies, the Kirsha training center, and the fabulous Donbas Arena, with a capacity for 50,000 spectators and a 5-star UEFA rating. But if you think his master plan was the one from 1995, you're wrong. The real coup came in 2004 with the hiring of Romanian coach Mircea Lucescu. Because he didn't just bring in a coach and that was it, but a whole work philosophy. Lucescu convinced Sergei Palkin, CEO of the club, that the key to success was to look for garotos. What? No, Brazilian boys.
Especifica.
They would take care of the offensive part, leaving the more rustic but disciplined Ukrainians to do the defensive tasks. Why does Lucescu want to join Brazil? Some believe it comes from when he played against them with his national team in the 1970 World Cup. He seemed to fall in love after seeing Tostão, Gerson, Pelé, and Jairzinho in action. My less romantic version is that Brazilians have great resale power. Whatever the case, the idea worked and they started arriving in Donetsk, cheerful dark-skinned boys who didn't speak a drop of Russian or Ukrainian, but who stood out on the pitch. Did it work? Take a look and tell me. And not just in the sporting aspect. Can you guess which nationality 4 of the 5 most expensive transfers in the entire history of the club belong to? Around business. Ajmatov and Lucescu took Shakhtar to the top and turned it into the most successful team in Ukraine in the 21st century. A dream that had a rude awakening in 2014. While Shakhtar was making a strong showing in UEFA, the country was still a hotbed of corruption with the oligarchs running everything as they pleased. Only now, these businessmen mafia were divided between those who looked to Europe and those who preferred Russia. Where were Ajmatov's sympathies? According to him, his little heart was with Mother Russia. It was kind of obvious, he was in the pro-Russian zone. Imagine if he said something else. Although it seems that he didn't mind the other side either, a little here, a little there, making money on both sides.
Baxter's over there. Rojo's there. Me right in the middle.
The man was in heaven, money was pouring in, he owned almost half of Ukraine and had a power that allowed him to exert effective pressure on public opinion through politics, football, the media and, some say, by foul means. And on top of that, he gave himself a small house in London. In short, 15 years after his supposedly good friend went bust, almost nothing in Ukraine moved if he wasn't in the middle. Well, not really, because what he didn't see coming was that, in 2013, his chess pawn, President Yanukovych, whom he supported with his media and some money, sent a treaty with the European community to hell and, on top of that, he went too far by dispersing the resulting demonstration. The people in the West, pro-Europe, couldn't stand it and had to escape as best they could. Of course, those in the East didn't find the joke funny at all, so they rioted, with some help from Mr. Vladimir. With the country on the verge of splitting in two, you'll say, goodbye football. Friend, you still haven't learned anything from Blatter, Infantino or Qatargate. If half the country is on a war footing, there's no problem, matches are postponed, played behind closed doors or venues are changed.
Y punto y se acabó.
First dead before losing money. Anyway, in Donbas, things were already a bit strange. the Argentine Facundo Ferreira says that, by spring 2014, March-May, Donetsk was taken over by separatists and the home games were the closest thing to an internal Argentine hooliganism. Wait, wasn't it that they were all in favor of Russia? Dude, things don't work like that in real life. It's not always black or white. Shakhtar's and Ajmatov's dilemma was that the club represented the pro-Russian zone, but the majority of its fans were pro-Europe.
En este momento parece ser que estamos en una situación complicadita.
The straw that broke the camel's back came in July 2014. The squad was in pre-season in France when news made their hair stand on end. Who knows who fired a missile from Ukrainian territory that brought down a passenger plane that was passing right by? They didn't even finish giving the news that 6 players had left the training camp, leaving a message to the president that they wouldn't even go back to work drunk. Here, the story gets confusing. While Palkin, the CEO of Shakhtar, all peace and love, said he was trying to convince the boys that nothing was happening, the players claimed that Ajmatov had regressed, returning to his old methods when he was Bragin's right-hand man and supposed friend. Aha! After 3 days of acid back and forth, the boys returned with the promise of the ball to go far away from Donetsk, Putin and his missiles. That day began the exile from Shakhtar, and the torment for Renault. For almost 8 years, Ajmatov acted as if nothing had happened and continued to play both sides between Kiev and Moscow. But the day came when he had to decide which way to kick. It was in February 22nd, when Russian troops crossed the border occupying the self-proclaimed republics of eastern Ukraine. That day, Renault lost all of his industrial areas in the area, and obviously, his economic power suffered. And it is one thing to have sympathy for the Russians and quite another to have them in your backyard. Because if the local oligarchy had served any purpose, it was to keep them on the other side of the border. If there had to be a mafia, let it at least be Ukrainian. So, when the gentleman's pocket was touched, patriotism was born. He created a foundation to help civilians, donated his media to the state, and even sued Russia for his losses.
Mira si es buena persona.
Very humanitarian on his part, but every decision has its consequences, and his sudden outbreak of nationalism collided Shakhtar head-on. Brazilians were lining up to leave the country. Some important players and employees wanted nothing to do with their boss's new loyalties, and the team rioted when he wanted them to go out on the field with a t-shirt in support of the Ukrainian army. On top of that, as UEFA only allowed Lviv and Kiev as venues, far away from Mr. Putin and his boys, there was no other option but to rent one stadium and train and live in the capital. One would say no problem, they are all from the same country. But despite the efforts of the media to show a united Ukraine, in daily reality, things are not so simple. The team suffers a kind of bullying from the fans of the local club. To tell the truth, I think from the fans of almost all the clubs in the league. Envy? Maybe, although I think it has more to do with the area they represent.
Por desgracia, sí.
So, at a local level, since 2014, Ajmatov's club has been bouncing around like a ping-pong ball. In UEFA competitions, things weren't much different. Teams from the rest of Europe didn't even want to enter the country, so the minors had to play at home in Poland or Germany, which is a problem because, as Ukrainian airspace is closed, they have to travel by bus or train to an airport outside the country. Obviously, with all this, the first thing to suffer was its economy. According to its CEO, the club loses €20 million a year in sponsorships, merchandising and tickets.
No, esto ya es demasiado.
To give you an idea, before the conflict, attendance was, on average, 42,000 people per game, a record in Eastern Europe. Today, by chance, it reaches 8,500. Of course, the team moved, but the fans didn't. So it's time to tighten our belts. Ajmatov has given the order not to buy players while the crisis lasts.
No hay plata.
Although they were able to reinforce themselves with some low-cost foreigners, the solution came from within, with talented local kids. They won't be like the old Brazilian stars, but something is something. Good news for a club that had to live its glory in the shadow of nationalism and suspicious management. I hope you like the story. Another example that football is not an island, it is constantly influenced by ideologies, politics, and even crime. For my part, I thank you for getting here. I send you a big hug and I'll see you in the next video.